to show you guys some really awesome customization techniques in order to add texture and new movement into our haircuts. So what I am going to be starting on is I have pre-cut a really basic shag shape on a mannequin head for us to work off of today. So the way that we're going to do this is I'm going to jump right into it. I'm going to start with my baseline, and I'm going to show you guys some really cool ways to change it up. Yeah, add something more than our standard baselines that can end up a little weighted and a little heavy. So the first technique I'm going to bring in today is going to be notching above our finger. So I've already got my pre-cut layers sectioned out of the way, and my main focus is going to be here on the baseline. I'm going to start with my fingers parallel to the ground, which is why I'm using a cutting stool today, because I want to be as eye level as possible to the area I'm cutting on. This way I am not elevating or over directing, so I know that I'm getting a really strong finish and balanced finish every single time. Once I have my fingers parallel to the ground, I'm going to go in with my shear, and I'm going to notch out pieces following the line I'm creating with my fingers. And what this is going to do is it's going to give me a really slight late razored effect with the finish. This works incredibly on my fine-haired guests that really like to see more movement within their cuts, but maybe the density of their hair is not going to support a razored haircut. I also really love using this on my really, really dense haired guests that don't necessarily want their ends thinned out, but want to have a little bit of movement, just something different in the cut to release a little bit of weight. The cool part about this technique is, yes, it's a customized technique in the first place, but I can also go in and change up the pitch of my shear to create different kinds of movement throughout. So in the beginning, you see, I started working my shear, going in perfectly straight into my subsection that I'm cutting on. What I'm going to do to change it up is I'm actually going to switch the pitch of my shear from left to right. Not only is this going to create even more movement within my baseline, but what this can do is I know I can use this on any haircut shape to push or pull the hair in a different direction than where it naturally lives. So hypothetically, if my guest, if her hair, she feels like it swings forward towards her face. If I wanted to push that hair away from her face, I would change the pitch of my shear, going in at more of an angle, so that way the short hair can push the long hair in the same direction. In another case, I like to use this where I'm going to work all the way across my section in one direction, and then I'm going to come back with my shears pitched in the opposite direction to enforce more movement throughout. The way I like to think of it is when I think of curling my guest's hair. If I know that my guest, she wants her hair to be more polished whenever she's styling it, I know she's going to take her iron, starting in the front and wrapping everything away from the face to the center back on each side. If my guest wants more movement and natural texture in her hair, we want to see that enhanced, but she's using an iron still, I know my guest is going to flip-flop one direction to the next, the way she's going to wrap it around her barrel. So I can think of that as something, as a point of reference whenever I'm creating this movement within my shape. So if I want something that's going to be more lived in and more tousled, what I'm going to do is go back in and flip my pitch from left to right. Once again, what this does is it's going to not only release weight, but we can almost use it as a technique to correct or enhance natural movement within someone's shape. I'm going to go in and balance out this side with my other. once again, what we're doing today is we're focusing on multiple different customization techniques that we can use on our guests behind the chair to really put our own brand within our haircuts. So often, I have attendees in my classes telling me that they get really bored with cutting hair behind the chair. A lot of the times, the demographics that we live in and the kind of guests that we have in our chair, generally, a lot of the time are coming in seeking this same overall finishes or looks because that's what's trending in their area. And as somebody that focuses on hair cutting behind the chair, I know how easily our daily life can become very repetitive, where we feel like we're doing the same motions over and over and over, creating the same looks over and over and over. And it's hard not to feel a little bit of resentment because we feel like we're working down a conveyor belt. So for me, it's really important that regardless of the shape my guest is after, that they're wanting to see as a finish, it's my job to be able to take these tools and really create something special for them. Something that is going to be a little bit different than the other 6 shags I've cut that day. And the way I like to do that is by using all of these different techniques to really create a point of difference from one haircut to the next, even if the shapes are exactly the same. So now that I've finished up my baseline with over the finger notching, we can really see how much movement it's really adding to this blunt shape, but it's still holding a really strong baseline. So I'm not losing the shape. How often have we been in a position where we want to remove weight from the end, so we pick the piece up, and we go and we point cut and point cut and point cut. And then, unfortunately, what can happen is we end up losing our overall shape that we've created within our cut because we've taken out too much weight. So over the finger notching, what that's gonna do is it's gonna create a really soft line while still holding on to that overall shape. And that is going to be my first technique that we're gonna use in our zone 1, being our baseline. Now that I'm finished with that, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take a different shear, something that's a little bit longer. And my next point of focus is gonna be the curtain fringe that I've already created. So, in order to create this curtain fringe, the very first thing I did is I took a center profile section from my triangle section that I already had set up before we started the live today.
Patricia says, I love Erica and all of her creative techniques.
Oh, I love some Mama Cause.
Thanks for joining us.
So I'm going to start with my center profile guide taken out of my triangle section. This is what I'm going to be using as my guide to length. I'm going to pull it completely forward on my gust head. Because what this is going to do is it's going to create my shortest piece of my curtain fringe right in the front and my longest piece here in the back at the highest point of the head. So what this does is I'm creating this curtain fringe based off of the head shape. And when we create something based off of someone's specific head shape, we're automatically giving them something customized and personalized to them because people are like snowflakes. No two of us have the same head shape. It's gonna change. So when we're giving something to our guest that is created specifically 100% off of the structure of their head, that is our first step to customization. Now that I have my guide created, I'm gonna separate my triangle into 2 sections, right and left. And I'm gonna work one side at a time based off of the center profile guide that I first created. Once again, the shape has already been created before we started the live, but I am gonna go back in and demo how I cut the curtain fringe, and then we're gonna go ahead and talk about different ways that we can really personalize it and create something magical for the guest that's wearing it. I'm gonna be taking my whole first half of my triangle section. I'm going to distribute across the head shape, and I'm gonna be working T to the part. When I say T to the part, I want my fingers to be parallel with the exterior line of the triangle that I have created. This is also going to be working with the head shape because everyone's round of their head is going to be a little bit different. Some are going to be stronger, some are going to be weaker. And if I want a curtain fringe that's going to live perfectly on my guest, aka no styling for them to very minimal styling for them. I want to work with the head shape. So that way the hair, where it lives naturally, the way it falls off of the round of the head, the work's already done. So we don't have to tell our guests how much time they have to spend styling when a cut is already created for their head. When I work T to the part, I'm working off of the head shape. My fingers are going to be parallel with the line I'm cutting off of. I like to take the flat part of my comb and place it directly on the line of the part, just to guarantee and make sure my fingers are indeed parallel with the line I'm cutting from. A lot of the time I find it really easy to think I am personally standing exactly where I need to be standing, but as we know, when we're working on a moving target and or a human, it's easy for us to change our body positioning without realizing it, resulting in one side being longer than the other, one side laying better than the other. So I like to keep little pointers in my head that I love to share with everybody else on exactly what I do to make sure my hand and body positioning is exactly where it needs to be.
That's getting lots of hearts.
Yes, Fringe for life. So I've already cut my first side, and we can see how really awesome of an angle we really got based off of working T to the part over directing across the head. I'm gonna mimic it on my opposite side.
Jennifer says, yeah, thank you.
Yes. I'm gonna go in with my comb just to make sure my body and hand positioning is exactly where I want it. And take a little extra length off of the curtain fringe I already created, just to actually put in a little bit more bluntness, so that way we have even more hair to remove weight out of with our personalization techniques. So as a very rough draft of a curtain fringe, this is where we're gonna start with. So we can see we've got a really nice, strong, balanced angle. Here in the center being the shortest, and then on each side, we have more of that extra length to frame her face. Gives us a little bit of that tail effect. The biggest difference between what we're working on, the shag shape we're working on today, and a true, when I think shag, I think Joan Jett. So the biggest difference is everything is disconnected around her face. Whereas when we want to see more of those stronger shag and mullet shapes, we're gonna have more of a connection to where it's gonna actually open up the face a little bit more. Those are things I like to save for whenever I'm detailing it out, which is what we're gonna start now. So looking at the fringe, before I'm gonna jump in with my shear, I like to take a step back and really get a feel for what it is that I like or don't like about what's happening already. So what I'm seeing here, I like the overall shape. I don't hate the length, but she feels really heavy to me. And if I'm really looking, I can see that there are some hairs that are starting to naturally live in towards her face, living more directed towards her mouth and her nose. And for today's shape, what I want to create is I want it to come away from her face. I want these pieces to expose more of her features. I don't want her to be so hidden behind her hair. Because I'm going to be working specifically in the fringe section, I am going to take a clip or two and clip the rest of her shape out of the way. I don't know about you guys, but when I work behind the chair, I get lost in what I'm doing very easily. When I'm having a conversation, when I am working on different heights, you know, different aspects of my day, it's easy to get thrown off. So for me, it is key to make sure I'm only focused on exactly what's in front of me. And in this case, it's the fringe. So that's the only part of this cut that I'm going to have not clipped to work on in this moment. As we said before, I want to see her flip out a little bit more. I want to expose a little bit more of her face. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start working in each corner first, and I'm going to be working with a twist technique, because this is the area where I need to create short hairs that are going to push long hairs. This is something we've been told in schools since our first day. Over and over again, short hair pushes long hair, short hair pushes long hair. Yes, that is something we all absolutely know, but there are a lot of different ways that short hair can push long hair and give us a different result. So what I'm seeking today is I want to create short hair that's going to push long hair away from the face. So generally what we start to do when we have a heavier fringe is we just start to thin it out, thin it out, thin it out, which is right. However, if we have a stronger intention for the results, we can really save ourselves time and expedite the process behind the chair with giving us an incredible, incredible result for our guests each and every time. So when I want to make short hair to push long hair, I know that means the short hair needs to be living underneath of that long hair in order to get it to flip out and away from the face. I'm going to start standing at a 45-degree angle from my guest's eye, and I'm going to flip open the section I'm working on because I want to expose the internal hairs, not the external, because whenever I start to create short hair on top of long hair, what that's going to give me is a layer, and I don't want a layer in my fringe. So flipping open, I'm going to take my shear and I'm going to gently open and close as I slide down and away. I'm also starting to lean my body as I'm moving for control of the section I'm working on. So if we look at the one section that we just focused on, just with that little bit of a sliver of hair removed, I can already start to see her starting to kick out the slightest bit. I'm gonna go in and replicate everything I just did a second time so that I can really start to see that point of difference in where this hair is gonna live naturally. So I'm opening up to expose the interior hair of my subsection. This is gonna allow me to hold on to the length, but once again, what I'm doing overall is I'm creating short hairs that are gonna push the long hair. With each snip, we can start to see that hair starting to push even more and more away from the face. The way I like to work this behind the chair is in every cut of hair. I'm going to continue this technique until I reach the center of my fringe. And while this technique specifically does remove some weight, it doesn't remove a ton. Whenever I want to go in and remove an abundance of weight, we're gonna follow up this technique with another technique that I really enjoy for my fringes. But I don't wanna remove that weight first, because if I were to remove it first, what's gonna end up happening is I'm gonna lose length, or I'll create too much internal movement. And then once we create too much, what then can happen is we lose our shape. And it's really important with a curtain fringe that we're holding on to that shape, because I don't want it to look like breakage. Flipping to my opposite side, I'm going to start with my finger and hand placement with my palms facing me, my two piece fingers also facing me when I start. Once again, I'm going to be at about a 45-degree angle off of the eye. In order to expose that internal hair that I want to create the short pieces on, I'm going to take one step back, and automatically my hand positioning is going to change. My fingers are now pointing down to the ground, and I can get in here seamlessly, gently opening and closing as I'm sliding down my subsection.
Oh, somebody said, I have done hair for 20 years and I just learned something new.
Oh my God,
That's
is
awesome.
The highest compliment.
I love that.
So you can see that I'm slowly changing my body where I'm starting facing my guest. And as I work down that strand, I'm starting to become more square with what's in front of me. So it ends up being all a seamless motion. This is also a technique that can be done with slide cutting. I personally am huge on dry cutting. I dry cut the majority of my guests behind the chair. What is going to help me make that decision is basically based off of how much control I need of the shape. So if it's graduation or a pixie cut, a lot of times I will absolutely start and do those entire haircuts wet. In this case, with more length, I am dry cutting her because I want to be part of what's happening. And I want my guests to be part of what's happening. There is no better feeling, honestly, than whenever we're creating a shape that's specific to our guest, and we're cutting them dry, and they're watching everything we're doing. So a lot of the times I will cut the right hand side or detail it out completely before I touch the left, so that my guests can be part of the experience. Whenever we go at our shapes and we're working at it on dry hair and we go on too quickly, it just looks like a lot's happening to the guest. But when we really break it down and focus on specifics in the cut, it becomes fun for the guests too. It becomes interactive. And everything we do behind the chair is interactive, so why not allow our guests to be part of the experience so that way they can see exactly what is changing and what's happening. And we can see, looking at now, with doing this technique on both sides, how different this fringe is already starting to live. And the only product that this mannequin was prepped with was L'Oreal Professional's 10-in-1 spray. So I used that after I shampooed her, just to help smooth, I love that there's a heat protectant in the product itself, but I also love it because it's extremely versatile. It works incredibly for all hair types. And I didn't want something that was gonna be too sticky, knowing that I was gonna be going in and dry cutting. So looking at her shade, we can already see, one, she's quite a bit softer than she was when we started. Two, those pieces that were once pushing into her face structure are now slowly starting to push away, push out. Looking at her, I feel like she's probably still a little strong here in this corner. So before I move on to my next technique, I'm going to pick up this little heavy area that I see. And I'm going to continue with my twist slide cutting. Just to make sure each side is balanced before I jump in with my next technique. Okay, now that I'm happy with the way the fringe is sitting so far, I'm going to introduce my next technique, which I have a very strong feeling everyone here is very familiar with. So I'm going to be doing a little bit of a punch cutting, but combined with an internal point cutting. So point cutting is something that we're all very familiar with. It's something that we all utilize behind the chair. And it's extremely versatile when creating any haircut shape because we can use it in so many different ways. But speaking back to that intention, I want to make sure when I'm using these different techniques to create a specific look on my guest that I have a reasoning for why I'm doing it. So in this case, my motion is going to be starting internally and pushing out. I could absolutely come in and point cut into my section, but once again, we're working on a fringe that tends to get fine very quickly. And what I don't want to do is sacrifice the shape, nor do I want to layer the fringe, which is why I'm going to be working internally. In this case, because once again, we are seeking the hair to push away from the face to expose her facial features. So it's really important that my body positioning is working in a position that's going to create that. So I'm gonna be standing in front of my guest when I do this, when I do it behind the chair and when I do it today. Because a lot of the time what happens is we stand from behind, we point cut, we point cut, we point cut. We remove the weight we wanna remove, but it's not really doing a whole lot for where the hair is gonna live. We're not accentuating the natural fall. So in order to accentuate it is why I wanna stand in front. I'm gonna go in with my peace fingers facing my body and flipping up. I like to add in a triple clamp, which means I'm gonna take my ring finger and place it along with my two piece fingers. What this is gonna do is it's really gonna stabilize the subsection I'm working on. It is dry hair, it pops out of place often, so I wanna make sure I have really great control. Once I'm comfortable with my body positioning and my hand positioning, I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna carve out pieces in a C shape. And I'm gently opening and closing. I could absolutely slide this right on through. However, I have a slight complex with the sound that we hear whenever we cut dry, and we get a little too aggressive with it. So in order to not have to hear the ripping of our guest's hair, I'm gently opening and closing my shear. we can already see just from that one go at it, how much more my guest's hair is starting to flip away from her face. So I'm gonna go back in and continue this technique until I'm satisfied with what it's doing. I can really see how dense she is. So finding where that density is at, also paying attention to, it's the fringe. A lot of our guests have widow's peaks, myself included, and colics in our fringe areas. That's another reason why I really like to focus on dry cutting when I work in a fringe. So that way I'm not finding any surprises that I wasn't prepared for. But with a little bit of patience, we can really start to see how much the shape of this fringe is softening and living naturally on its own. I would also like to mention that this mannequin had, I did not blow dry her with a brush at all. 100% rough dried, because I didn't want to fool myself by thinking that the hair is gonna live in a certain way solely based on styling. I like to see what exactly I can get from my guests without any styling first, so that way whenever they are at home styling themselves, it's easy and it works every single time because their haircut is customized to their hair type and the natural fall of their hair. So we can already start to see how this shape is starting to change on this side versus this side. This side we're still a little heavy now that we're seeing the difference between the two. She's not flipping away as much as I would like to see. So I'm gonna go in, pick up my subsection. Once again, standing in front of my guest, bringing in my triple plant. And I'm gonna work from the inside out. The reason I like to texturize from the inside out is because it's gonna remove more weight than if I'm working from the outside in. I like to think of whenever I'm going in with a traditional point cut and I'm working from the outside in, that I like to think of as pretty much just focusing on the ends. Whereas this, I'm after a specific result being living away from the face. So I need something that's gonna give me a little bit more control. And with internal point cutting, I can get a lot deeper into the density of the cut than I can with my traditional point cutting from the outside in. Generally speaking, well, I don't even know that it's generally, all of our shears, regardless of the brand, are gonna be the sharpest here in the center. So whenever we're doing these techniques on our guests on dry hair, it's really important to make sure we're not going too far down the blade of our shear. Otherwise, what'll happen is the hair can get caught in the screw or in where the two blades meet. So it's really important to make sure whenever we're doing these techniques, because in real life, behind the chair, let's be honest, the majority of us are not moving at this as slow of a pace as I am doing in this current moment. So when we get into things and we're moving super quickly, sometimes we start to lose control of everything we're doing. Ooh, look at that. Okay, I see you. But what we're doing is we start to move really quickly and forget to focus on small details, such as which part of the blade I'm using to create a specific look, or our body positioning, our elevation. Unfortunately, they're all things that can easily be put on the back burner when we're working with our guests in real time, just because we're having conversations. We're making sure their bodies are in the correct places for us to work off of, making sure the stools are, present or high enough or low enough. There's a lot of working things that go into our daily life behind the chair.
What questions do we have from our viewers? Feel free to drop them in the chat box.
Yes.
And also let us know where you're from. Where are you watching from? We started about 1 o'clock Central Time. What time is it where you're at? What brand is your shear?
I
love that you have to check.
I am not a shear specific human, so all of my shears are all of the brands. I'm more of a specific as to the metals the type of metal that it's made out of. So this one specifically right here is called Above. I don't know, I just bought it like 2 weeks ago because I wanted a 4.5 inch shear. So that way, whenever I'm doing classes like this, I have more control over the shear I'm working with. Behind the chair, I use a lot of 7 and 6.5 inch blades. Those are usually my go-to, but I've really been digging the smaller, shorter blades as of recently for detail work. Now that I'm happy with my fringe, I am actually going to switch to a little bit longer of a shear. These are Sakudo shears. These are one of my go-tos. They're my 6 inches. What I'm gonna start here now is because I'm moving into my layer sections. So that's why I'm gonna pick up a longer blade, so that way I can get more bang for my buck. I can work in larger sections, so whenever I'm working around the hairline or the perimeter is when I like to work with my smaller shears for detail purposes. But now that I'm getting into the internal portion of the haircut, I'm grabbing my longer shears. So I'm dropping down the layers that I cut previously. And the way that we're gonna start detailing them out.
Cindy says, it looks like the fringe is also getting a bit shorter, which...
Yes, a little bit shorter, which was part of the goal. Whenever I'm dry cutting, generally what I like to do is I like to start with everything a little bit longer, so that way, not a lot, like 1/4 to 1/2 of an inch longer, so that way I have room to really decide and change up what I'm gonna do. I don't wanna be boxed in with anything whenever I'm creating a look for a guest. So it's really important to me that I am given the freedom to change up the length a little bit with the different techniques I'm doing.
Cool. We also had a hello from the UK at 7:30 p.m. over there. So hey, Donna.
Yes, thank you for joining. Now that we're in our layers, I'm gonna bring in a couple different techniques that I like to use. And all of these techniques, I would like to mention, do not have to be used solely for this specific cut or on the specific parts of the head. These techniques can actually be used pretty much on any haircut type, shaping especially. The only ones that I feel like have restrictions are some of the ones that take out a lot of weight, like what I'm getting ready to do, because we want to make sure the formation of curl we're working on can sustain having weight removed out of it. I do not want to go in on my really curly gusts and thin them out too much, because then we're going to collapse the shape completely. But a lot of these will actually work on curly hair. The next one I'm going to move into is recently my favorite out of all of them. So I'm going to work with back cutting. So I find a lot of the times, especially with a lot of the cuts we're doing currently, there's a lot of disconnection. I am a fan of disconnection for days. However, with that, what can happen is we can get bulk internally in our haircuts. And I have a lot of guests that tend to be really dense around the occipital area. And a lot of the times what I see is we'll pick up our sections and we'll kind of slide cut or we'll point cut out just to kind of cut that corner off and soften. But that really doesn't do a lot for the bulk. So what we're gonna do for bulk, this is gonna remove a little bit of length as well as density. So I'm gonna start with my shears open, and as I move down the hair shaft, I'm gonna start to close them about 3/4 of the way. Continuing to only work with the center portion of my shear. And what this is gonna do is it's gonna give me a really, really seamless finish. So in real time, without slowing it down too much, this is how the technique's going to look. We can see that it's taking off quite a bit of length because my layers were longer than my length because I went in and cut that baseline in the beginning again. But if we look at that section that I just cut, there's no really, really clear indication of where it starts and where it ends, which is what I want because it makes it extremely seamless. In this case, what I'm going to do is I am going to work around the head with this technique to get off the little extra length we have within our layers. This is one that I would recommend only focusing on dry hair, because whenever we do this with wet hair, what happens is the hair clumps together when it's wet, and when we go to remove that weight, It may not seem like a ton when it's wet, but when it's dry, we find that it's a lot that we indeed ended up taking out. So whenever I am not in the hair, my blade is open, and as I'm working down the hair shaft, it starts to close about halfway. Very, very similar to back combing. But if we're looking at all of this beautiful movement and texture that it's giving us, but the best part is nothing looks like it's too thinned out. I don't have an abundance of thinning happening, so it's still holding on to that shape incredibly. We can still see the original haircut, because what I've seen or what I find or what I personally have caught myself doing, you know, in the past is it's very easy to be in a position with a haircut where we're detailing it out, but we lose the time to do it. So if we have a lot of weight in the shape that we created, we cut it wet, we blew them out, and now we want to go detail. A lot of the times what can happen is we can put a lot of focus on our thinning shears to save time and or cut corners. I love a thinning shear, do not get me wrong, but I feel like it's very easy to pick them up without having a specific intention. So for me, I love going in and having intention with these different personalization techniques that don't actually include a thinning shear, because I have more control and I know exactly what my end result's going to be when I'm working with different customization or personalization techniques. And then, not to mention, it allows me to recreate these looks when my guest comes back in 6 weeks without me ever having to second guess, like, what was that? Where did it come from? Why is this thin? Because I know how all of these are going to grow out. So looking and checking my overall shape, now that we have done our back cutting, we can really see, like, look how soft those layers are. And I'd also like to point out her shortest layer only hits a few inches past her ear, almost right below the ear. And then her length is going to be down here a few inches past her chin. If I wanted to remove even more weight, or maybe I wanted to add some shorter pieces in, because after all, she is a shag. So maybe I want her to have a little bit more sassiness to the shag, a little bit more natural movement within her own texture. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go in, and this is where I am going to use my traditional point cutting techniques. So I'm working in subsections that are following the head shape, and I'm not going down any further than that parietal ridge. Once I have my section, before I start cutting on it, the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna look in my mirror, and I'm gonna make sure that the cut itself has enough density in the baseline. What I don't wanna do is thin out the baseline, because then I lose my shape. Take my
Patty
section.
says, great technique. And we got another beautiful with the
Yes.
cat eyes, the cat heart eyes.
Yes. So now that I have my subsection, I'm going to put a slight bend in my fingers, and I'm going to take my comb and comb out where I'm cutting. Because once again, I want to cut with intention. I want to take weight out of somewhere that needs weight out. I don't just want to go in and point cut for funsies. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to work my shear open and close so I can get further down into the area I'm working on. And you'll notice I'm going to switch the pitch of my shear back and forth, because this is going to give me more peaks and valleys. But the one thing I want you to notice is I'm not creating any of my shortest pieces right where she parts, because a lot of the times what we'll do is we'll layer the most right on top, and there's nothing wrong with that. However, if I am trying to get a specific look or volume and I'm just going in and layering on the top, I'm actually just kind of creating like a decoration. I like to refer to it as a Christmas ornament, because it's pretty, but it's not serving purpose. So in this case, let's say she wants a little bit more height. We'll say she's more fine. If that was the case, I'm not gonna wanna go cut my shortest layer right on top, because that's just short hair on top of a round surface. So what it does, it actually brings more attention to it rather than a benefit from it. So if I want her to have a little bit more height, I'm gonna work with my same subsectioning. I'm gonna slightly bend my fingers, spread out and separate the hair that I'm cutting on. and I'm gonna go right below the highest point of that head. Now this is saying she does part in center. If she parted on the side, it'd be the same technique, just a little bit different area of the head, but right below where she parts. I'm gonna go in and start cutting shorter pieces, keeping the entire head shape in mind. So for parietals over here, and I want short hair to push the long hair, I know if I cut something too short, it's gonna stick straight up. But if I leave it too long, it's not gonna serve any purpose, and it's just gonna end up giving me really a hole in her overall shape. So opening and closing.
We had a question about what would results be like on curly hair?
For which technique?
I believe this one that you're doing right now.
So if I were working on a curly haired guest, if I was working on my guests that are formation, I'm gonna say 5 through 8, so a higher curl formation. The difference is what I'm gonna do is I will go in, and instead of point cutting from the outside in, I'm gonna go in and I'm almost gonna notch rather. Because if we think of curly hair, it grows at a 45-degree angle. So if I'm cutting it at another 45-degree angle, what's gonna happen? 45 minus 45 is 0. So I end up not having hair to have a shape at all. So if she were curly, in that case, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do the same with my sectioning, but I'm gonna go in with my shears, fingers being at the end of my subsection, but I'll go in with my shears and I'm gonna notch out little bits at different heights throughout, because then what I'm doing is I'm still cutting solid. I'm still cutting blunt, so I'm not hurting that curl pattern, and we can absolutely do that on all hair types. However, if I was working specifically on curl, my main goal is I don't want to thin it out, and I don't want to cause any unwanted or unhealthy frizz, because frizz is a good thing when it's there for the right reason. Frizz created from, over processing or thinning something out too much, in my mind, ends up being not good frizz, bad frizz, negative frizz. But good frizz is created with intention. So I'm going in, and some of these pieces you can see are really, really short, but they're not dense. So those short pieces, because of where they'll live naturally, so if I take out this little bitty short piece I just cut, it's gonna lay over the round of the head, causing these long pieces of hair that live above it to have more volume. So really, even more than thinning out, we're remanipulating where the hair lives. It's gonna live there no matter how we cut the shape, but if we go in and we're cutting the shape with intention and cutting where these pieces live naturally in a way to enhance them or have them live in a different type of way, we end up in a really, really awesome finish. So that way, once again, we can recreate moving forward when our guests come back in 6 weeks or 8 weeks, or for my curl guests, usually 10 to 12 weeks. So I can really start to see how the shape is getting stronger. We're seeing a little bit more of those shag inspired pieces, but I feel like what's lacking is I want to see some more something around here. I want to see more of a face frame. So a lot of the times whenever I do my face frames, I'll cut them visually. In this case, I want to show you guys my favorite way to cut them using a personalization technique that's going to set us up for success every single time on every single guest. I'm going to clip my length out of the way. So once again, everything from ears back I have clipped up, so that way I'm not pulling hair from anywhere that I don't want to be cutting.
Jeffrey Britt says, hi, Moomy.
Jeffrey, baby. I'm gonna be working in vertical subsections from the highest point of the head down to the hairline. And I'm gonna pull everything completely forward. So I'll turn her to the side, so that way you guys can see exactly where I'm pulling from. So I've got my vertical subsection, pulling everything forward from where it lives. And I'm gonna go in and point cut. So the line that I'm cutting is gonna be perpendicular to the floor, parallel to my vertical parting. And because technically what this is doing is working with the head shape. So when I work with the head shape, I get softness. So we can already start to see where this face frame is gonna expose a little bit more of her jaw, but it's still holding the structure of the shape, as we've been talking about. I'm gonna let that baseline drop out. The way I don't cut myself is I'm pulling my shear out as it's closing. If I were closing it as I go in, there's a good chance I wouldn't have a finger left. So now we've got a little bit more exposure, but I want it to flip away from our face. So what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna go back to that very second technique that we used today with our twist and slide cutting, because I want it to kick out a little bit further. So I'm gonna expose that internal hair so I can create those internal short pieces. Center of my blade, slowly opening and closing as I work back. And this will take up a little bit extra length, but nothing crazy. If we don't want it to remove that length, what we can do is let the baseline drop out. So looking on the side that we've already started to add a face frame versus the side that we haven't, we can already see from literally two sections in 2 personalization techniques, look how big of a difference that is. Because I feel like she's still a little weighted, I'm gonna move in to a little bit of channel cutting, which is my jam. I literally love channel cutting for everything. And the way I'm gonna create that is I'm gonna ask my guest to tilt her head to the side, so that way I can balance my stationary blade on her head. And I'm gonna go in, opening and closing, and I'm moving my hand to really form that shape. So if I want to see more of a C shape, I'm going and I'm carving in that C shape. And what channel cutting does is it creates a very visual separation or disconnect within a haircut. It takes a ton of weight out without leaving, you can't see where it's being taken out of. So it's not leaving a mark or anything super noticeable within. This is one of my favorite ways to remove weight, in all honesty, because I feel like what it does is it really, really adds a point of difference to a shape. So once again, looking at the side that we were creating the space frame on versus the side that we haven't, it's a huge difference between cuts with utilizing very, very few techniques to get us there. Want this to flip out a little bit more, so I'm gonna go back in. Define just a bit. And then I'm also thinking I'd like to see a little bit more pieciness right on top. So before I showed you how to use the back cutting to remove weight and density near the occipital bone. Well, now I want to do it on top. I want to do it more for a trend technique versus a weight removal technique. I just want to see some messiness. So I'm going to take my subsection, always working above the parietal ridge because the hair that lives below it lives differently. So that's not what I'm working with right now. I want to work with the hair above it. I'm going to go in, back cut. And that's going to give me a really cute and strong disconnect on that top without creating a ton of actual layers. Because what I don't want is, yes, we're doing a shag, but she's more of a modern shag. So I want it to be a little bit more seamless. I'm gonna unclip her length that we clipped up so we can start to get a feel for both sides. So if I didn't want to add a face frame on this side, but I still wanted her to be a little sassier, I am gonna go in and follow up with my back cutting technique again on the opposite side. Overall, what these techniques do is they give us more tools to create something specific on our guests. My ultimate goal in life is to be able to brand my haircuts. If I see a group of 7 people with bobs walking down the street, not only do I want to know which ones I cut, but I want everyone else to know. Our guests are our billboards. So if we are in a position where we're bored with our cutting, or we feel like we're doing the same things over and over and over, we end up resentful and we end up bored. Or we end up cutting the same things over and over. And I don't want to live that kind of life. I want to have that intention in everything I do with the shapes that I'm creating that ultimately are going to leave some type of branding on my guests. Like, I own you, that kind of thing. Not really. But going in and really putting our own brand on things.
Joel says, I love this. And we had another question about how you established your baseline, which I know that we can watch in the first probably 3 minutes, but do you want to recap that for everybody?
Absolutely. I know that we're getting almost to end time. So what I'm thinking is we'll do a quick recap of each of the techniques and how I use them.
Perfect.
So rewinding back to the beginning, we started with our baseline. For those of you that are just now joining, I did pre-cut per shape a rough draft into a shag shape. But the first thing we did is we clipped up the layers and the fringe, and we focused primarily on the baseline alone. And I went in and I used an above the finger notching technique, which I like to think of is a razored finish without actually utilizing a razor. I went in with my fingers parallel to the ground and notched out pieces all the way along, switching my pitch from left to right to create more movement, to give me a still stable baseline, but to add movement, because I know for me, whenever I go in and I point cut my ends, 90% of the time before I'm finished, I go cut off that point cutting that I did on my ends because I don't like the way it looks. So this is gonna be a really consistent way to point cut our perimeter. We can do it from the start or from something that we've already cut a strong baseline on. After we did our baseline and perimeter all the way around, we moved into our fringe, where we started with our twist cutting techniques, where I took small subsections and flipped them over once to expose the internal pieces of hair, because I wanted to create short hair that pushed away from the face, so that way the long hair that lives on top of it could react as well. So I started by taking my subsection, twisting once to expose the inside, and then gently and slowly open and close my blade as I work away from the face, and continuously did that until I was happy with the overall effect. After we did our twist cut, we moved into our internal point slide cutting, where we took our 2-piece fingers for our hair, flipped everything up. We were standing right in front, added our ring finger in for that triple clamp, and worked in from the inside out, continuing to move our shear away from the face, not towards it,